Welcome into episode 112 of The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. I'm Ken Ray.
I'm Nicholas Raba.
And I'm Nicholas Tacek.
Last week we talked about some of the new privacy and security features in macOS Mojave, but all is not quite right with Apple's latest operating system. Oh sure, it's fine for the average user, but a few problems have raised their ugly heads. We'll talk about those on today's edition of The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. So last week we talked about what Apple's done to protect the privacy and security of Mac users in macOS Mojave. Ultimately, for the average John and Jane, you guys said go for it. Though we did also say that there were a couple of issues with Apple's latest operating system. Now, a computer operating system is an intricate thing, and it's hard to get everything right off the bat. One of the issues that we've heard about has to do with full disk access. Now, what that looks like to users is, well, I think what that looks like to users is the constant request for permissions. Is that correct?
Not quite. Apple actually kind of smushed two different security features into one thing. The permission requests will show up for things like accessing your contacts, your camera, microphone, that kind of data is when you're going to see the request for permissions. The full disk access stuff is quite a bit different, actually, under the hood.
Okay. Well, how? I'm sorry. Because it sounds like you're saying, no, it's not going to be about the asking permissions because you know all those permissions that your computer is asking about. This is not that.
Exactly. Apple, and this is on the developer forums and people who spoke with Apple engineers at WWDC, Apple has stated that they don't want to make this easy for users. They don't want to have an easy way for a developer to say, hey, I need access to your entire disk. Please give it to me, and just have an allow or deny button. They don't want to do that because they don't want to see developers abusing it. They don't want to see malware authors abusing it. They want to make it extremely hard for an app to gain access to the entire disk. At this time, there's no programmatic way to do it. There's no way for a developer to write a line of code that says, hey, please throw this alert up to the user and give me access to all the files or the protected files. The user has to go into system preferences. They have to basically put an app on a whitelist, on a safe list that allows it access to all the items on or all the files on the disk. And that step is not, again, there's no way for a programmer to have that appear programmatically. You have to tell a user to go and take these manual steps to add something.
You see, I'm trying to figure out like what kind of apps would need that? What kind of legitimate apps would need that? Like that kind of fold. I mean, because I'm thinking about, there was a stupid thing that came out a few years ago where it was a guy who had made some sort of game, I think it was, and you could play the game, but everything you shot was actually deleting a file from your computer. And it could be an important file, it could be a not important file. And he said, hey, this is just performance art, or this is an artistic thing. And other people were like, no, you're an evil, awful person. Obviously, you wouldn't want to have that app have full disk access. So I'm guessing that's the reason that Apple is making it harder for people to do that. You can't accidentally end up doing something that's going to totally bork your system. But, I mean, you're telling me it's also a problem. So I'm guessing there are apps that should have that access. Can you give me some examples of like, oh, well, this is now screwing me up because I was using this thing before and now I can't because I don't know why?
Sure thing. A first example that would come to mind would be if you're using a third-party backup solution that is not Time Machine, that is not using Apple's built-in solution. That would need to access all of your files in order to make a backup. Also, if you had a program that needed to access your mail database, say it was some sort of, filtering program or something that you wanted to analyze your mail message history, something like that. Or if you needed it to interact with your browser data, security programs need to access everything on disk. So there are legitimate programs that do need to access all the files on disk, or a larger majority of the files than Apple is providing by default. So there are legitimate applications that will need this access, and currently there is no easy way for those apps to request that access and have a nice little dialog box appear that is the way it works with the microphone access or the contactless access.
Now, in your research, have you found any creative ways that they've done it?
No, the best I've been able to find, and this is affecting our own programs actually, because they need to access browser data in order to clean it. The closest I've found so far is there is a way with a one line of code to make the correct system preferences pane appear on screen. So at least we'll be able to get the users to the spot they need to be in system preferences, but they still have to take the rest of it is still manual steps. And so the other problem here is that at this time, there's no easy way for an app to know if it's got access to everything on disk. There's no easy way for something to gracefully fail. Some of your apps, when you upgrade to Mojave, might just stop working. And you might sit there and go, what's going on? And we had that happen with some of our users. So we can provide information on how to add an app to that list of approved apps. But keep in mind that you don't need to do this for the majority of your apps. I would say you're only going to want to do this if it's a developer you trust and they ask you to do it and have a valid reason for what their software does, or if you've got a piece of software in Mojave that maybe is a little bit older, maybe isn't supported anymore, but you trust it, you know you need it to get your work done, then you might, and if you're having problems with it that sound like it might be an issue with accessing files on disk, you might need to go ahead and add the app to the safe list. So to do that, you would be wanting to open up System Preferences. You can click the Apple icon in the upper left-hand corner of your screen and click System Preferences. And once that screen appears, click on the Security and Privacy icon. And then on that screen, there is a Privacy tab, which you'll want to click on. If the lock icon in the lower left-hand corner of the window is locked, it means you need to authenticate. So go ahead and click the lock, enter your username and password, and then you'll be able to proceed. At that point, you will click Full Disk Access in the list of items on the left-hand side of the screen. Click the plus icon, and a new screen will appear. Then you can locate the app in question that you need to add access for. Select it, click the Open button, and then it will be on the list of approved apps. If you want to remove it later, you have that option as well. And apps that appear, if you might already have apps in some of those lists in that section of the security and privacy settings, and you'll see that some of them have checkboxes next to them and some don't have checkboxes. And that's more applicable to things like the contact access or the camera microphone access. If an app has requested access and you've denied it, it will appear in the list, but the checkbox won't be checked. So that's Apple's kind of convoluted way of showing you've denied this app access. So if you're saying, oh, I made a mistake and I really do need that app to be able to access my contacts because it needs to be able to do whatever with my address book, you can just check the checkbox on that screen and it will grant that app access. So that's a way to kind of see the status of what you've granted and denied access to for the apps on your system.
All right, there are a couple of things that leap to mind really quickly. I mean, first of all, you said, I mean, if the way Apple has set it up is working, you won't necessarily know that the app you're trying to use isn't working. I'm thinking about like a third-party application that is making a backup of your system. If you haven't granted it full disk access, you won't necessarily know that it's only taking part of what it should be taking, not everything that it's taking or should be taking.
Yeah, and it depends. As I said, at this time, there's apparently no way for a developer to kind of ask the operating system, hey, do I have full disk access? Apple hasn't built anything in, as far as we found in our research, that is a simple yes or no answer to that question. You kind of have to go and try and access a file that's in one of those protected areas and see if you can access the file or not. It's really convoluted. It's not very developer friendly, but Apple is kind of banking on the fact that the majority of your apps don't need to access other data. On iOS, this isn't even an issue because everything's sandbox. Nothing can access data outside of its own sandbox. Because macOS works a bit differently and because third-party non-Mac App Store apps can basically be distributed as non-sandbox and they can normally access everything, that's no longer the case in Mojave. Apple is blocking access to some files and data at a level that kind of goes beyond your normal, whether or not an app is sandboxed or not.
Here's what I'm thinking about, though. So, like, in all of the recording that I've done over the past several years, I've had to use apps that didn't necessarily play with the Mac OS the way Apple wanted them to play with the Mac OS. I'm thinking particularly, I believe it's Rogue Amoeba had an app that I was using to record, and it's great because you would go there and it would say, okay, listen, your Mac's not going to want to install this. Here are the exact steps to do it. Kind of like what you just did a minute ago, right? You were like, okay, so here's how you whitelist these apps so that you make sure they do have full disk access. It wouldn't be difficult for a developer, a bad developer, to put up, oh, by the way, here are all the instructions for how to do this. What kind of things do you want people to look for before they do that? I mean, before they go in and say, oh, right, SecureMac.com/checklist actually has the step-by-step of how to do this. This application is asking for this permission. I'm going to go follow those steps and boom, put this thing on my Mac. Like what kinds of things do you want users to look for before they go ahead and take those steps to grant literally full disk access?
The very first thing I would look for would be whether or not you trust the application. If it's something you've used for years and from a company you trust, you're going to give that a lot more leeway than some random app that you just downloaded. But beyond that, and this is something that Apple provides for when you're asking for permission to use the microphone or the camera or stuff like that, you can actually add some code to your program as a developer that will show a reason why you're asking for it. In that little alert that pops up, you can say, this audio app needs to access your camera and microphone in order to facilitate online chats with other people. You can basically add that text to your as your reason, so that will appear on the screen, and the user will see an alert saying, "Hey, this app wants to access your camera microphone because of this reason." There's no way to do that again for the full disk access. So I would say in situations like that, it's going to be up to the developer to be laying out their reasoning to the user, and it has to be a pretty legitimate, necessary reason. You should say something along the lines of, we need full disk access in order to do XYZ, which is the core purpose of this program. And even then, just keep in mind that just because they're saying that might not be their full reason. Again, use trusted software, get software from trusted companies. But this is a situation where developers are going to be butting heads with Apple in terms of Apple's choice of security. It's a secure solution for users. It will break some apps and cause some headaches for developers and users alike, however.
I did say, by the way, that you can find those steps on SecureMac.com/checklist. That'll be in episode 112, which, of course, is the episode that you're listening to right this second. Again, though, I don't even want to say use common sense. I would say use uncommon sense. Before you go through all of those steps to whitelist something, do like Mr. Tachek just said. Make sure it's somebody you trust and make sure there's a legit reason. Downloading, quilting patterns or kitten videos, those are not legitimate reasons to grant full access. Go to YouTube.
You want to watch that video file. You need to follow these instructions.
YouTube has monkeys riding pigs. They've got hamsters on pianos. They've got more cute animal videos than you'll ever need. So really, just use more than common sense, let's say. So that's one issue with Mojave. Another has to do with something found in a beta of macOS Mojave by Patrick Wardle. And what's funny is we're actually not going to talk about the thing that he found because we don't know much about the thing that he found, but he raised some other issues in finding the thing he did. What he found, again, all these requests for permission that we've talked about, Wardle found a way to bypass those. Now, being a good guy, he didn't say what that way was. Rather, he showed that it was possible, then chose to give Apple a bit more time to address it. A piece from TechCrunch also pointed out that Wardle's findings are not a universal bypass of the feature, but the bug could allow a malicious app to grab certain protected data, such as a user's contacts, when a user is logged in. So if we don't know how this happens, assuming Apple's fast at work on a fix anyway, why are we talking about this today? Because Wardle brought up, and it was kind of funny actually, brought up a sort of philosophical stance on Apple's part. He posted a video on Twitter of his bypass working, though again, he didn't show how it worked, just that it does work. He also said in the Twitter message, by the way, if anybody has a link to Apple's macOS bug bounty program, I'd love to report this and other 0 days donating any payouts to charity. Which sounds, like sweet and noble, except the whole thing's a joke because Apple doesn't have a bug bounty program for macOS. even though it does have one for iOS. So let's go over possible reasons. Is this a way to get people to, get their apps strictly from the Mac App Store? I mean, I don't want to say that Apple is scaring people into not getting apps from any place else, but could this be a way to say, when you wouldn't have to worry about this is if you bought all your apps from me?
I think yes, to an extent. I was thinking about this a lot when I was kind of fighting with this feature with our own program, trying to get things working. I think it's a combination of, yes, pushing the Mac App Store, but less that actual App Store, but more the kind of philosophy behind it. Basically saying apps that are in the Mac App Store have to be sandboxed. They are limited in what they can do. iOS apps are pretty well locked down in that same regard. So I think this is kind of a big picture thing. Apple is going to be moving towards more of that iOS security model on macOS in the coming years. Even if they say they're not merging the operating systems, they're going to take the stuff that works and they're going to put that in, to replace the stuff that doesn't work. And on macOS, there are security issues. So if they made a security model on macOS that was similar to iOS, you'd be cutting down on a lot of that. So that's where I see this going, is it's showing developers, okay, for now, we're still going to let you do this thing you're trying to do, but we're not going to make it easy for you because most apps don't need access to this and we want our users to be secure. In the past, they got developers used to sandboxing their apps. If you want to be in the Mac App Store or on iOS at all, you had to sandbox your app. So they kind of trained developers to go that route. And if you didn't want to sandbox your app, you had to be a third-party developer outside the Mac App Store. So this is another thing where they're saying, okay, you can do this for now, but it's not the way we really want you doing things. And in the future, they're probably going to push for a more restrictive environment for apps to run in. So that's where I see them going with that. Less the Mac App Store itself, more security philosophy.
I guess what I was asking about specifically, though, was actually the lack of a bug bounty program. And it occurs to me we actually got fairly far in and we haven't said what a bug bounty program is. It's basically what it sounds like. If you are a security researcher working on the iOS side, if you find something that could crash a phone or something that could steal data or whatever, you can submit that to Apple. Not super easy, as I understand it. I mean, there's still a select group of people that Apple takes seriously on these kinds of things. But if they find like an actual bug that could actually be problematic, Apple will pay out a bit. They'll not only say thank you for your time, they'll not only list you in whatever security, when they post their security notes, they say discovered by or credit to or whatever, but they'll also give you a little do-re-mi. There's nothing like that for the Mac right now, which seems to kind of bother Wardle, and I don't blame him. I'm wondering, is the lack of a bug bounty program for macOS, is Apple sort of trying to, I don't want to say continue the myth that Macs are impervious, but do they not see a need to do this because how many vulnerabilities are you talking about? Why aren't they paying out on this side?
No, wait. What I got out of this is that everything is switching over to iOS and that platform. So why make a separate program for the Mac bug bounty program when it's all going to merge into one anyway?
Oh, but Phil the Thrill Schiller has said repeatedly that they're not merging, dude. You don't believe it?
That's the thing, though, and I've been thinking about this a lot as well, is, if they were going to announce the Mac, a Mac bug bounty program, they should have done it at the same time as iOS. If the reason was that they're, afraid of tarnishing the image of the Mac as completely free from viruses and malware and all that stuff. We all know that's not the truth. Macs are susceptible. It's nothing super special about Mac OS that is stopping malware authors, aside from the fact that the market share is still fairly low compared to Windows. But we've seen that change over the past few years. More and more Mac malware every year. But what Nick's saying makes sense to me. Why bother with the bug bounty program if you're moving over to a different security model anyway? I still think it's a bad choice. I think they should be doing a bug bounty program. The iOS one, as far as I'm aware, it's invite only. Apple's definitely doing it differently than almost any other company. As a lot of the other companies, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, they all have open bug bounty programs. Anybody can submit a bug as long as you can prove that it works and does what it does. And they actually provide special, some companies provide special machines or servers or whatever that you can attack and test your bugs out on in a legal way. And Apple's, again, being Apple, and they're saying, oh no, we're going to keep our security stuff secret and we'll only talk about if you're in the club. And it's frustrating. if they had a Mac bug bounty program, we could submit a bug to them because, and I don't know if Patrick's.
Wait. Are you looking for the invite right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. No.
Is that what you're looking for?
I wish. But we did find a vulnerability or an exploit to an extent to access that protected data in the course of researching how to actually show that alert to a user or bring the user that screen. I was able to find a way for an app to access protected data even if it wasn't on that safe list. I don't know if it's the same as Patrick's, and I'm not going to provide details on it anyway because we don't want to help the bad guys. But if Apple had a bug bounty program, we could report it there.
Now, Nick, there are third-party bug bounty programs that you could sell it to, and big paydays right there, right?
Okay, here's the thing, and we talked about this in a previous episode, I believe, on some of the bug bounty programs. There are third-party bug bounty programs, but if you sell your bug to them, you don't know what they're going to do with that bug. It might be that they'll turn around and sell it to a government from a repressive regime. That they're going to sell it to somebody who's going to use that exploit to basically catch a human rights activist in the act of fighting for human rights, and they'll arrest them or do something worse to them. There's a real moral issue there with those third-party data brokers or exploit brokers because you don't know what they're going to do with the exploit when you sell it to them. When you're selling it directly to the company that produces the software, you're ensuring that it's going to their security team and that they're going to fix it for the safety and security of all of their users. If you're selling it to a third party, you're kind of saying, hey, this bug's up for grabs to the highest bidder.
Is this whole thing a PR game? I mean, I'm trying to figure out, because the Mac is as important to a lot of people's lives, and certainly it holds just as much important information as an iPhone does, at least for a lot of people. I mean, there are some people who there's much more personal information on their phone than there will ever be on their Mac, even if they have both things. I almost wonder if an iOS bug bounty program, there are two ways to go. First of all, there are over 1 billion, as of a couple of years ago, there were over 1 billion active iOS devices out there. So making sure that that's as safe as it can possibly be is very important because you're talking about not really a seventh of the planet, because I don't think it's a 1-to-1-to-1 thing. But with over 1 billion out there, you want to make sure that's as safe as it can be. At the same time, you're up against Android, which has a bigger, install base and is also replete with malware and all kinds of, nastiness. Is Apple paying into a bug bounty program, partly making sure that iOS is safe, but also partly saying, see, not only are we safer, we're making sure we're safer by paying into this. If somebody finds something, they can let us know, blah, blah, blah. It's this whole thing is it PR on one side to not have a bug bounty program because you want people to think the Mac is as safe as it can be, and PR on the other side to have a bug bounty program because you want people to know that the iPhone is as safe as it can be?
I just don't think the Mac is that important to Apple. I hate saying that, but it just seems to be the truth. No, seriously.
You get to answer all of those emails, by the way. You get to answer all those emails.
Yeah, it's fine. But I love Apple, and I've used Apple products my entire life. But they just haven't seemed to care about the Mac as a hardware platform or macOS as a software platform in recent years. And it makes sense if you kind of distance yourself from the whole I love Apple thing. iOS and iPhone hardware, and I guess iPad hardware to a lesser extent, is the majority of Apple's income these days. That's what makes cash for them as a company. The Mac right now, yes, it makes some money, but the only real application as far as the Mac goes and how it ties into iOS is developers use Xcode on the Mac to write apps for iOS, and they don't even have to do that. You can write them in other programming languages and other systems. But I hate saying it, but it's the only thing that seems to make sense to me these days is that Apple just doesn't care as much about the Mac, or and not necessarily out of a maliciousness or some sort of disdain, but more that they see that the security model going forward is going to be the iOS security model. They're going to have to drag the Mac platform as a whole kicking and screaming into that new future. So kind of why bother if we're going to be changing things up in the next few years anyway? I don't agree with it. I don't like it, but that is the only thing that seems to make sense.
Defending what you're saying too, and I love my Mac, and I think people know I love my Mac, but in defense of what you're saying, most people do most of their computing on their iPhone. They don't think about it as computing because we've talked about it before. Apps aren't software, they're apps. Apps aren't giving me access to the internet. I'm just going to my Facebook app. You're doing more computing. Most people are doing more computing on their phones. It may not be the most important computing they do, and they may not think of it as computing, but honestly, for most of us, most of the computing that we do is on our phone on a daily basis. There is one thing that Wardle did say, or he has been quoted as saying, until there's a reason for Apple to change its approach to security, it's not going to. Generally, companies don't change something until they realize it's broken. I mean, it sounds like he thinks it's broken already, but I mean, it's sort of like, are there enough Macs out there at this point that one thing could hurt all of them that would make Apple change its ways? And then follow-up question, if something catastrophic like that happened, would it be too late?
It took some pretty widespread malware in the past before Apple started implementing Xprotect, which is their kind of pseudo antivirus that's built into macOS. That didn't always exist. They added that kind of later on, and it was in response to a rise in Mac malware that couldn't just be swept under the rug. I mean, when stuff hits the news and Apple looks bad, Apple reacts by changing. And
Patrick definitely has the ears of the media. I mean, his story, his history, ex-NSA, people definitely grab onto that. So anytime anybody is looking for information on it or Patrick releases information on it, he definitely has the attention of folks. And he is one of those people in the industry that will help that change happen.
Another aspect, kind of going back to the financial side of things, Apple's not, I would say they're not, when they're running the iOS bug bounty program, they're not paying out as much as some of those third-party vendors are. But I think they're kind of targeting what I said earlier about morality of security researchers. They're targeting the security researchers who want to do the good, the right thing, the good thing, but also acknowledging that security researchers generally don't want to give away their findings for free. They put some hard work into it. They'd like to get paid for it. So the bug bounty program for iOS is allowing security researchers to do that. They're selling the bug to Apple. They know it's going to be put to good use. It's not going to be used to spy on people. And then, for the Mac one, at this point, I wouldn't expect their payouts to be the same level as any of the third-party ones, which do have Mac bug bounty programs, by the way. It would just be nice to see something, anything there. But I don't think it's an issue of balance sheet or necessarily that as far as what's limiting Apple. I guess it's hard to kind of put in words. Apple's not paying the most. So if you were just looking to get a payday, you would be going to a third-party place anyway. They have a bug bounty program in place specifically for people who want to do the right thing but still get paid. So I don't see why they don't have that for the Mac. It would be really nice if they could, but it might take something rather large to happen to a lot of Mac users before they kind of say, oh, okay, yeah, maybe we should have something in place.
I love a show like this. I love a show like this one, seriously, because it's, I mean, I love the shows where we talk about here's, step 1, step 2, step 3 for doing this thing. But I love when we get to go off, sort of philosophically on the security side of stuff as well. So yeah, it was important that I love a show like this. By the way, I mentioned those step 1, step 2, step 3. We talked earlier about ways to whitelist programs. Again, do this sensibly, do this responsibly. But if it is something that you find yourself needing to do for a particular app, those steps, as I said before, will be on the website for this show. What you're going to do is look for episode 112 of The Checklist by SecureMac, and you'll never guess where you'll find it. SecureMac.com/checklist. You also find a link there to the original Patrick Wardle story, which of course will lead you to other links. And pretty soon you will be down the internet rabbit hole, as they say. SecureMac.com/checklist. If you have a question you'd like to ask or a topic you'd like to hear us hit, our email address is checklist@securemac.com. That address again is checklist@securemac.com. If you can't remember that, please do remember this. You're listening to The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. And we'll talk to you next week.